like, hey, do you want to do a webinar? Happy to do a webinar and to share some thoughts. So let me jump into it here and share what we're going to talk about. I'm going to start off with a Dilbert comic. I'm a big fan of Dilbert comics. I find that Dilbert has, of course, the humor to it, and maybe it's sad, but Dilbert also has reality built in, right? So here we have Dilbert talking to Dogbert, and Dilbert says, I need to find some data from an unreachable guy named Ed. What should I do? And Dogbert says, just make up a bunch of data like everyone else. And Dilbert says, wait a minute, hold on. Everyone else does that? And then Dogbert says, are you doubting my data? You know, there's a line in the comedy Anchorman where one of the characters says something to the effect, 60% of the time it works every time. And Will Ferrell says, that doesn't even make sense or something like that. So the reality is, and I'll give more of my background to discuss how I got into this space of data literacy. I helped actually pioneer and invent the entire field. I was one of, if not the first voice really to start to build the world's first true full program on it, I would say, from what I understand. As Sean said, I have had a chance to speak and travel internationally within my sphere of data literacy. In fact, I got to speak at the United Nations. They brought me in to join a panel as they were trying to become more data driven and gave me an opportunity to answer questions or share thoughts in that. So let me give a little bit about more background. How in the world did I get into this? And one of the questions that I get asked around data literacy is, how'd you figure it out? Well, I didn't figure anything out. I want to be perfectly frank with that. What ended up happening is years ago, I was at American Express and I ran a business intelligence group. Now I took the job, maybe 10, 11 years ago. So we're talking a long time ago. And at the time, the democratization of data, meaning putting data into the hands of a lot of people, was kind of at the forefront. It was happening. At American Express, I had the president of the US Consumer Group. I believe he probably had the say in building this team out. And he was kind of visionary in that sense. He's now the CEO of Etsy. And I would say he has turned that company around quite a bit. And so in my role, I was told that I would be training the end users of our products that we were building from a business intelligence perspective. But the way we were training, and I would say this is how a lot of training is still done today within data and analytics, is we would say, this is what's in the dashboard, like this is how you point and click in it and filter. What we weren't doing is teaching people how to use data. So I actually created this plan around basics, like it was around basic statistics or doing the basic statistics, built a learning plan, presented it to my EVP, and she said to me, no, they're not ready for that, maybe in the future. That was my first kind of, I would say, thought processes around, empowering people with skills that they might not have or might not have gone to school for, might not be in their career space. Then I got hired by Click to be an entrepreneur. At the same time, well, not at the same time, maybe 8 months later, Gartner, I call them the research firm or something like that, published an article on it. They didn't realize that some little nerd in Utah named Jordan was building data literacy. And from there, to a degree, I would say it just blew up. And so I've been in the data and analytics space for years now. My current role, I'm vice president and head of data and analytics at a company called Brainstorm out of Utah County, Utah. But when I took this role, I've only been here since March, mid-March. I negotiated it in my contract, if you will, my position that I could still do things like this, keynote speak, et cetera. In fact, I had to deliver one last night from McCormick, the spice company, if you will, at 11 p.m. my time. I think we were hitting that entire Asia Pacific region. And so I'm not a night person. That was a little tougher. So Sean, your time period of 11 a.m. in the morning is fantastic. So what do I want to do? I'm going to present for, 30, 35 minutes. I am very open to questions coming to me as I discuss through the chat. And if it goes with the flow, it's easy to get to as I'm discussing it. We can answer it then. If not, we could look at it at the end. And I'm an open book. So if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn and everything, I'm happy to do it. So I want to go through these three things today in this webinar. First off, what is this world of data? And I understand, you probably understand it, but hopefully what I'm going to do is set a really good foundation that can transition us into directly what is data literacy, the what, and then finally the how. How do you be more data driven? Now, some people don't like that phrase. I was actually talking to a colleague of mine. His name is Ben Jones. He owns a company called Data Literacy LLC. He's up in the Seattle, Washington area. And he congratulated me on my new book. even though I think he hates that phrase, be data driven. I think it's because some people, when they hear that phrase, they think the data is going to drive everything. Where's the human element to it? No, I actually use it in the sense that we want to combine the human element and data. The book came out, the second book, and we'll talk about that at the very second to last slide, I believe, is called Be Data Driven. It's really targeted for leadership and organizations to be able to be data driven. And what I believe spurred me on to write book 2 was during the pandemic. That was one of the top buzzwords in the data and analytics space. So let's jump in. Let me talk a little bit about the world of data a bit here. And I'm going to pull up a number that is very big on your screen. That number represents 175 zettabytes. Okay, that's the annual data sphere by the year 2025. In fact, I saw not long ago, as I am contracted to write book 3 and I was working on it a little, another prediction showed it at 180 plus zettabytes worth of data. So by 2025, that's a lot of data, right? And organizations, think of Pinnacle Health, think of my company Brainstorm, think of American Express where I was, we're producing all these massive amounts of data, but we have to be able to derive insight, intelligence, and things from it. And in essence, if you think about it, there is a massive skills gap within the data and analytics space. Picture a company of 10,000 employees. And at this organization, from a data and analytics professional, so they have that in their title, out of 10,000 employees, what, yeah, maybe 200 to 300 who are data and analytics professionals. That leaves you 9,700 to 9,800 of people who are probably being asked to utilize data, meaning they're being asked to use whatever amount of this 175 zettabytes by 2025. I believe at the end of last year, it was 50 zettabytes. They're being asked to gather and utilize that to help them in their jobs. But if they didn't go to school for that, if they don't have a background in that, how successful do you think they're going to be? I think it was Gartner at the end of 2019 or 2020 who was saying that something like 20 to 30% of analytics projects are being adopted. So if you're an organization or you're a data analytics professional and you're investing either a lot of money for data and analytics to have success, or you're a data professional building a lot of data and analytics for end users, but you're not seeing it get adopted, frustration can occur. And we'll actually talk about kind of how the pandemic shaped or did some things in the data space from my observations or from experience, my anecdotal thoughts on it. So picture yourself, imagine to yourself, whether you are a data and analytics professional or not. So if you're data and analytics professional, I want you to think about the audience that you are trying to support, whether it's customers, whether it's your own employees, whatever the space may be. If you're a professional, you have a good grasp on the data side, but does the audience that you're working with have that? If you're not from the data and analytics space, man, it might be overwhelming. It might be intimidating. It might be all these things that are there when it comes to data and analytics. One question that I want to tap into on this slide is the fourth bullet point down. What is the future of data technology? Will robots take my job? So I traveled to South Africa. At the time I was working for Qlik, QLIK. If you don't know who they are, their main two competitors are Power BI and Tableau. Here in the state of Utah, Domo could possibly be seen as a competitor, but not on the same level as those big three there. And Qlik's main partner, I would say, or premier partner in South Africa, invited me to speak at a conference down there, and then took me. I was there for a few days, took me around. I would meet with customers or organizations, maybe potential customers. But anyway, they asked me to speak also to their organization. I believe I was talking to them, and a gentleman raised his hand and was basically like, is all this data and technology going to make us lazy? I flipped it on him. And I said, I gave something along these lines. Now, this was back in 2018, I believe, is when I traveled out there. And let's just face it, I'm getting older and probably maybe have some of the details out. But basically, I flipped it around and I said, I want you to imagine that it would take 3 hours for you or somebody else to build a data visualization, to build some sort of data analytic that could be utilized or whatever. Now imagine the technology can do it for you in 15 minutes. You have now opened up your time to 2 hours and 45 minutes of deep work on that information. So it's not making us lazy. If it is, it means that we're not attacking it right. It should be enhancing and empowering us. So when we think about data and analytics and these future trends that are out there, because they're there, machine learning is probably going to get bigger and bigger. We hear about artificial intelligence all the time. How do we interact with the insight and the data that those things spit out to us? So the data and technology, let's allow it to augment us versus be intimidated by it. Now, this whole data sphere that we talk about, when I delivered, McCormick had me do 3 sessions, a 6 a.m., an 8 a.m., and then an 11 p.m. The 6 a.m. session, I think it was, oh, I lost my train of thought. But what I want us to think about now with this slide is the reality is, as we sit here, if I were to go back a couple slides, a few slides, however many it is, and show you that 175 zettabytes worth of data, there is this thought process. There's a great book out there, and hopefully I'll mention, I know I will, I have a slide with books, but a great book by Cal Newport called Deep Work. In this book, Cal Newport shares that the brain's capacity has 4 hours a day for deep work, right? Meaning it's not answering emails, it's not reading Microsoft Teams messages, etc. What it is it's that 2 hours and 45 minutes of deep work on that data visualization, on the interpretation and analyzing of the data and information. But why in the world would we ever do that? Data is just data, right? And we need something to bring data to life. And you can see it on your slide here. Analytics brings data to life. So we can source data, we can cleanse data, we can govern data, have data privacy rules, whatever. That data sits there and it needs something to bring it to life. Data and analytics should go together for the end goal of what data should do. We use that analytics to draw out the insight, right? So, and we're going to talk about analytics and the 4 levels that exist there, and I'll give an analogy around that. But we need data, we need analytics, or we can use analytics and interpretation of data visualization or whatever to find insight. And then we should be using that insight to make a decision. Most companies are not really good at this. And we'll talk about that hopefully a little bit more here in a second in the levels of analytics. The second yellowish orange box that you see is a data-driven decision making. Organizations should get really, really good at making data-driven decisions, have a process, have a framework to make that happen. Let me talk a little bit about those 4 levels of analytics. And I'm going to use an analogy to do this. Most organizations are stuck at level 1, descriptive analytics. So let's use the analogy to illustrate what I'm getting at. Now, this analogy, and you'll see hopefully why very quickly, is something that I shared pre-pandemic. And when the pandemic hit, I stopped sharing it and I eventually brought it back. I want each and every one of you to imagine that you're sick. Well, now you can see why I probably got rid of it as the pandemic hit, right? Imagine that you're sick and you go to a doctor and he or she comes into the room after you've waited for a while, looks at you or looks at the symptoms, here's the symptoms, says whatever, and says, you're sick, leaves and never returns, right? Would you ever go back to that doctor? I sure hope not, because the doctor didn't do one of the key things. Didn't really find out why or describe why you're sick. In organizations, whether it's business, corporations, healthcare, government, public sector, private sector, whatever the case may be, I would argue that probably 90 to 99% of organizations are stuck at descriptive analytics. They describe things. These are KPIs. This is measuring how good we're doing against KPIs. These are data visualization, dashboards. Now, sometimes you can have a predictive analytic or a forecast with it, but there's something greatly missing. Now, imagine you're with this doctor and he or she says, you are sick. Here is why. All right. We are now going into the diagnostic side. This is diagnostic analytics. We have to get really good at this. In the business sense, if we are sitting here and only describing what is happening, what has happened, or putting up a forecast to show what could happen, we need to get to why it happened. So for example, yeah, and I hate to say this, but I've got multiple companies that would do this here in Utah. One is Brainstorm, where I'm working, and I'm going to argue that probably a lot of companies do this. When our salespeople would go to someone, they're looking for metrics that tell the best story. That's what salespeople do. They do this with data and analytics tools, right? They want to sell you Tableau or Click, and they make that thing shiny, and they have data that is probably manicured in a perfect data set so that when they build the visualization, it works seamlessly, etc. So imagine a salesperson is like, ooh, that data shows the story isn't as great, but this one is. So I'm going to pull that one. That's a descriptive analytic. But the reality is we should be illuminating everything. We should see why. So if here's a KPI in an organization and the KPI is 100, whatever, and we're at 90, the diagnostic analytics side of this is, why are we only at 90, right? A lot of times what you're going to see is people will publish descriptive analytics out and leave it. And we're sharing dashboards. There was one company I worked, or when I was at Click, if I remember the numbers right, they had 400 Click dashboards that I believe every single one of them was being maintained, and only 6, and I call them dashboards or files, and only 6 were actually being utilized. So they're maintaining 394 of these, whether it's a data viz, dashboard, whatever, and 6 are being utilized. Stop it. Don't do that, right? Use good descriptive analytics, get really good at the diagnostic analytics. When we think of data literacy, that's these first 2 levels in the main sense. So descriptive is what, diagnostic is why, the third is when we know what happened, why it happened, can we build some predictions on it? Let's build some predictive analytics. So the doctor would say, you're sick, here's why. If you do A, B, and C, X, Y, and Z can occur. And then sometimes, what does the doctor give you? It'll give you a prescription, he or she will give you a prescription to help solve the problem. I want you to think of that as an external thing telling you what to do. In data and analytics, think machine learning, right? Artificial intelligence. It's not us building a descriptive, diagnostic, or predictive analytic. It's the machine and technology saying, based on all the data, the machine learning does it on its own, builds whether it's an analytic, whatever it is, and says, you should be doing this. Now you'll see the arrows around this. These arrows are designed around the sense that this is an iterative process, right? Data and analytics isn't perfect. Doctors are not perfect. They don't always get it right. Reality is, a lot of companies will say fail fast. We like to fail fast. Most companies don't. They don't like to do that, but they say it. It's catchy, right? It's a good thing to say. What I want people to learn is to become people who learn fast. In data and analytics, statistics is based on probabilities, right? Statistics is probabilities. And guess what? If we have something that's a 90% prediction, that means 10 out of 100 times, it's not going to work. Think of your neighborhood, right? If you're predicting 90% likelihood of something happening, that's awesome. And there's 100 people there, 10 people aren't going to get it, right? So we have to understand it's iterative and that we're learning. I mentioned I'd talk about this a little, or I believe I mentioned this. How did the pandemic kind of shape things in the data world itself? So prior to the pandemic, I worked remotely, I was going to say for years. That makes it sound extremely long, and maybe it was. Prior to 2020, I'd probably been working at home 5 to 6 years, maybe 4 to 6 years. And when the pandemic hit, I've got 5 children. It's like I joked, I believe, multiple times, man, my family's going to get sick of me being home, right? I'm traveling 1 to 4 times a month, and they're going to get sick of me being home. Well, I also thought I thought without travel, my calendar is going to open up. But guess what happened? It got busier. If you think about the pandemic, I have a colleague here at Brainstorm. She heads up our marketing. And she basically said something, and hopefully I'm not getting the numbers messed up, that the pandemic drove digital transformation, like took 4 years of what you needed to do or whatever and built it into a few months. And maybe I'm messing up how she said it. Organizations pre-pandemic wanted to be data-driven. They were investing money in it. They had probably bought tools. They're sourcing data. And then when the pandemic hit, you would think that the utilization of data points to pull different levers to survive during the pandemic, during shutdowns and all this, that would be beneficial, right? Problem was, and this is anecdotal, right? I haven't done my own study on it, et cetera. They found out probably pretty quickly they weren't data-driven, right? That they couldn't do the things that they needed. Their data literacy wasn't there. One of the things I believe that underpins that so heavily is this skills gap at the side. So the 5 things on the left-hand side of your screen are the pillars of a data-driven organization that I created. On the right-hand side, you see the skills gap. There's a skills gap. Again, let's go to this 10,000 employee company. 200 to 300 are data and analytics professionals. 9,700 to 9,800 are not data and analytics professionals, or they might not have the skills. Therefore, when they are trying to utilize data or being told we've got to use data here to use decisions, and they're not comfortable with it, that you're not going to be as data driven as maybe you should. So with that, let me jump into the next section, right? We just did the world of data. This is about data literacy. What in the world is data literacy? So at my time at Click, the definition that we used came from Raul Bargoff, and if I'm saying that last name right, and Catherine D'Ignacio. I actually shared the main stage with Raul at one of Click's user conferences. They wrote a definition that said that data literacy was the ability to read, work with, analyze, and argue with data, right? And this definition, I don't remember the years, and I should have clarified, like when I first started building this, we didn't just call it data literacy. I think we called it multiple things. We called it like data literacy, analytical literacy, data and analytical literacy, whatever it was. I met with Gartner, and Gartner was like, just land on one, and we pinned it on data literacy. Data literacy is this ability to read, work with, analyze, and communicate with data. Notice what is not on there. Data literacy is not data science. Not everyone needs to be a data scientist, but everyone needs data literacy. And it can vary on what your data literacy is going to be based on your career, based on your path, where you want to be, what you do. And also understand that the skills that you can learn within data literacy to help you in your career, hopefully can also help you in your personal life. Think about right now, United States with inflation where it is, understanding the data, understanding things maybe can help you make smarter decisions when it comes to certain things that you're doing. Of these 4 characteristics, the one that I find to be the most important, and hopefully it stands out this way, is the ability to read data. To read something, by definition, once I looked it up, is to the effect, if I'm messing any words up, the ability to look at something and comprehend it. If you can't look and comprehend the data in whatever sense that you're looking at it, Excel, table, data visualization, whatever it could be, if you can't understand it, how can you work with it properly? How can you analyze it properly? And how can you communicate with it properly? So each of these, think about it in the sense that you're comfortable working with it. Can you filter in a data visualization? If you're a data scientist or statistician, can you do statistics well with it? Analyzing data, can you find the insight within it? Just talked about the 4 levels of analytics, process, maybe a process that you can analyze the data. Communicating with data, can you effectively communicate out? Imagine you found the best golden insight that exists in your data at your organization. Eureka, it is the golden nugget, and you have no ability to communicate it, or you just plain stink at it. So no one does anything with it. So we've got to be able to communicate. There is a field, and a friend and colleague of mine named Brent Dykes, I would say is one of, if not the world leader in this space of data storytelling. Can we effectively communicate data stories to audiences, hopefully driving change or driving decisions? So that's data literacy, what it is. Now, let's get to the how side of this. Data-driven decision making, we could also call part of this data literacy. And Sean, you're exactly right. The first thing I'm going to talk about is the 3 C's of data literacy. When I am asked, and I think in the McCormick events, I was asked in the first 2 a question along the lines of, how do I get started? Well, right here, the 3 C's of data literacy. Notice what I don't say. I don't say, go learn how to code, go learn how to do statistics, go learn how to do data science, machine learning, engineering. No, with data literacy, start with these 3 C's. Be curious, be creative, and critically think, right? I think the world, we have a famine of critical thinking. And I mean, let's take political ideology aside, personal ideology aside, any of those things. This ability to take data and information, remove hopefully as much, if not all, our personal biases, and critically think on the information. We need curiosity. I have 5 children. With those 5 children, how many questions do you think I get on a daily basis? Nonstop, right? And maybe nonstop's hyperbole. And there is no doubt that I get frustrated with them, or upset, or I'm like, oh, please stop. But they should know, and I hope they know, that my philosophy is never stop asking questions. For whatever reason, we as adults get data and information, we take it at face value. Whether it's whatever data and information made us feel good, it supports our thoughts. Guess what? That doesn't necessarily mean just because it supports our thoughts that that's correct. It's supporting our thoughts. Great. Uh-oh. Did my screen, Sean, can you tell me, is my screen back there?
I see this, the data literacy.
Okay, good.
C's. It looks good.
Awesome. It disappeared on my screen for a second. I was trying to close something and it disappeared. So anyway, just make sure that you're not taking things at face value. If you see data, even if it supports ideology or thoughts or a business decision you want to make, question it. Go to the root of it, right? Get to the bottom of it. If the data you are looking at is built by an organization that has an agenda, I would start questioning it big time and be like, oh my goodness, right? We need, and inside of the business world, in your careers, people will cherry pick the data to support whatever it is their goal and agenda is. That is a lack of data literacy. And what we can do as we grow our data literacy is question it, not in a bad way, but get questioning on it. Be a data skeptic. The world is doing an amazing job of creating data cynics. You can be a data skeptic. Question it. The data that you're presented might be 100% accurate, but it's okay to be like, tell me a little bit about your process. Why did you do it this way? Why does it look this way? Oh, that makes sense. Let's roll with it. Another thing we want you to do, be creative. Everyone's background has a place within data and analytics. We are not trying to eliminate the human element, the gut feel from data. We want to combine the human element with the data element. Data can be really dry. It's really interesting. I was talking to a former Utah State Aggie running back, I believe he was, and an NFL player who saw me on a podcast, and now he and I have connected and we're going to meet. Oh, my mind just totally went blank on where I was going with that. But anyway, be creative on how you're looking at things, right? We need the human. Oh, where I was going with the NFL player is, it's interesting. In the sports world, and the sports world gives us such a plethora of statistics in the use of these things, like the movie Moneyball, right? Well, in this case, you had a former NFL coach who really hates the analytics side of where it's gone in the NFL, and you have one NFL coach who really likes it. The reality is there's probably a happy medium between them, right? Use your creativity, use your curiosity, make decisions with it, but also be open to other things. Finally, critically think on it, dig deep work within it. Oh, and after, by the way, that's how I would say start your data literacy journey or improve your data literacy journey, and then find something that interests you in the data and analytics space, the technical side, because you're going to need technical skills to a degree. It depends on what you're doing. You don't have to get too super advanced, but maybe the use and the interpretation of going in and out of a data visualization. But find a technical skill, something that interests you. There's statistics, data ethics, data governance, artificial intelligence, machine learning, data science, data analyst, data visualization, data literacy, pure data literacy, right? Different things that you can do to learn. Next, how do you make a smart data-driven decision or data informed? This image that you see in front of you, and Sean, I should have told you this. I'll PDF this and send you these slides so you can distribute them out.
Great, thank you.
This was developed by my former colleague. He's still a friend of mine, and I can still call him my colleague. He was the one who hired me and basically let me be an entrepreneur and build what became data literacy. This is his framework. Get good at the 6 A's, right? And again, it's circular, it's iterative. Get good at asking questions, acquire the right data to help you answer your question, analyze it, apply. Now, what it means here is apply your human element. It says integrate the data with your professional experience and be conscious of your mental models, like your biases, or maybe you do things always the same way. You need to announce it. You need to decide and communicate and announce it, make the decision. And we should also say here, execute on the decision. And then we need to assess it, right? Iterative. What worked, and maybe it's not going the way you thought, like those 4 levels of analytics. Oh, we predicted this, we used prescriptive. Man, did that fall short. Can we use a descriptive analytic? Can we ask a question? Can we acquire the data? Can we diagnose it, analyze? And those 2 things, the 4 levels of analytics, really can go into this or work as part of this entire decision-making framework you see in front of you. But just make sure that we're learning fast. Not necessarily, we don't want to think, oh, let's fail fast. No, let's learn fast. How can we improve? What can we do here? Finally, let me give you a 5-step process to improving your data-driven approach to things. Now, this can be seen in your personal life, your career. This is also something that organizations can do. I was a part of a study while at Click, where Click and Accenture partnered, and we talked about, I think the title might have been something to the effect of the human impact of data literacy. And through that, we had steps, things that could be done or whatever, if I'm not mistaken. And I've extrapolated and made these my 5 steps. Number 1, first thing to do is, what are you trying to achieve? Maybe it's an improvement in marketing. Maybe it's an improvement in decision-making. What do you want to achieve? Second, build a strategy that gets you there. Okay, I want to achieve this. This is the strategy I'm going to undertake to get to that. Do you have the right tools and technology to help you get there? Historically, you will see things where tools and technology were made step 1, and then maybe force fit onto people or told to people, this is our strategy. A tool is not a strategy. Make that clear. A tool is something to help your strategy. 4, do I have the right skills to do this? Do I have the right data literacy skills? Do I have the right technical skills to make it happen? Train yourself, learn. Things are out there. Finally, do I have the right environment to make this happen? Establish the culture. Culture is the #1 roadblock to data and analytics success. It's not clean data or things like this. It's the culture of an organization. If you're doing things on a personal level, is my environment set in a good spot that I can succeed with this? If it's a team environment, if you are a leader, make sure the culture is a data-driven culture. Help people to understand we're not overtaking their jobs. We don't want to replace them. We want to enhance them with data, combine data and the human element. So again, I will send this out. You don't need to write this all down. I'll give it to Sean and he can distribute, but different books that are out there. Brent Dykes, I believe I mentioned him. He's the data storytelling guy. I might've mentioned Ben Jones. He's got, I think those are only 2 of maybe 4 of his books. But anyway, there are books out there. And there are probably, I probably have many more than this, to be perfectly frank. So if you want book recommendations, again, connect with me on LinkedIn and guess what? And I can provide them for you, etc. Finally, Sean mentioned it, my first book, Be Data Literate, the data literacy skills everyone needs to succeed. I launched last year. It's from Kogan Publishing. You can buy it at Kogan. He mentioned an Amazon published author. You can buy it there. And then the second one is Be Data Driven, how organizations can harness the power of data. And I think that one was born through the pandemic. I think that's where my idea came to write that one. So with that, Sean, I'll say thank you for having me. I went a little over what I said I would, I think I said 30 minutes to you, and I think I've gotten 35 or 34. Hope that's okay.
Oh yeah.
But I'll see if there are any questions from anybody.
Let's see, anyone have any questions? No, I really like this topic, Jordan, and it's really, like you said, everyone thinks that everyone needs to sit down and code. But it seems like, what you're saying is we need to all kind of take a minute and go through this process that you're outlining. What are we really trying to achieve? Why do we want to know this? How can we implement this in our agency once we know it?
Absolutely. And what I would say is, for most people, they don't need to learn to code. But you should be networking and get to know those that do code, right? Because they'll have that technical acumen. And then you go back to that ability to communicate. Or do you have a good ability to ask questions of the data? Then go partner with those data professionals who are as nerdy as me and who can help do maybe some of that grunt work, that detailed technical work. And then you can hopefully find that insight to make a decision. Yeah.
And in your experience, that process of helping an agency kind of go from anecdotal management, they think this is what's going on, to sort of really using data. How long is that? Is that usually a lengthy process in your experience?
Yes, it is to get a full-blown like data strategy rolling. That being said, you don't need to boil the ocean. Like, for example, I came into Brainstorm in March, basically to lead this organization as a chief data officer, chief data and analytics officer, to be data driven. And I remember when I don't know how long it was when I started. I've only been here just over 2 months, or 2 months and like 7 days or 9 days or whatever. Mm-hmm. And one of the goals they had for this year was basically using artificial intelligence. And it's like, hold on, let's take a step back here. We're a company of 131 fully staffed. We have a few openings right now. We don't even have a good data infrastructure in place right now. You're talking about artificial intelligence. Let's put that on the back burner for maybe year 2 or 3, maybe. Instead, let's break it down. Let's find where we really need to use data to start off, which we've done. And they had that in the beginning, but they also had AI to be a part of that. And it's like, no, let's do this and do it right. We don't want to set things up in a mess. So it takes time, but it doesn't mean you can't have success and proof of concepts and things off the bat. Remember, you can set your outcome. We want to be data driven. Now that's vague, of course, but what's our strategy? Okay, here's my 10-step plan. I'm first going to tackle this. Number 2, I'll tackle that. Number 3, I'll tackle this. On forward till it's successful. Use that to drive. Hopefully you can use the outcome and strategy to drive the right tools and technology for use. Hopefully you use that to drive the right skills from a data literacy and a technical acumen perspective. And hopefully you're establishing the right culture. So it takes time, but it doesn't mean you can't see quick wins and quick successes you can utilize those to build your momentum. And hopefully in the long run, what you're doing is creating a truly data-driven organization.
Yeah. And it seems like a lot of organizations will pick a technical person to sort of spearhead that, where they really need somebody that can kind of be more like what you're talking about, a data literate person to be sort of the driver of the effort, rather than just say, hey, you're technical, you go do that.
Yeah, well, and it's so there's an interesting thing with this is years ago, I would say the data and technology space were separate from the business space. So if I'm going to hire a good chief data officer, I better hire someone who has good soft skills. They better be able to lead, communicate, hopefully project manage, but also has strong business acumen. That role or that world of data storytelling is really tying the business and the data. Where those could in the past sit separately, now we need them to go together. So it's a combination, if you will, of the technical with the business acumen and soft skills, being able to lead or make decisions. It all goes together. You can't just, American Express, prime example. My first ideas around data literacy were there. They declined it and said, maybe in the future. A few years later, I think that was in 2015 or 16 where they declined it. In 2019, I think it was January, American Express reached out for help on data literacy. And one of the things they said is kind of this, we hired a bunch of data scientists, put them into each business unit, and they're not using them very effectively. You know what I mean? So we need that holistic strategy, and that is a data strategy that ties to the business strategy.
Yeah. And in our business, or the business we deal mainly with, it's mental health, behavioral health, medical data. And that's always the trick, is to find the person who can speak to clinical people, speak to clinicians, but then say, okay, now let's go over and spearhead a data project.
Yeah, it's tough. And that's why in some cases it's like, let's hire the right person to lead it. Let's empower everybody to be data literate and roll. And that's why you could create just small wins. Don't try to boil the ocean, but find these small wins that can get you there.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. Well, this has been great, Jordan. Do we have any other questions from anyone? Anyone have any comments from the group that they want us to address? Very good. Well, we sure appreciate your time, Jordan. Is there any parting words or anything you'd like to add?
I would say connect with me on LinkedIn and let me know any questions. I've been in this space of data literacy, whether it's creating strategies, creating data and I would say also probably helping within data strategies, or just the empowerment around data literacy in general. That's probably the best way. It's not necessarily sitting within data strategy. It's not in data storytelling, but it's this empowerment of data literacy where I've really honed my abilities and things like that. And it translates, I would say, into these other areas. And now I work in data strategy. So let me know how I can help. Come to me, connect with me. Happy to give answers, happy to answer questions. If you're building something like this, working in something like this, we can roll with it.
Great. And you're available to do consulting and to do presentations for organizations?
Yeah, go ahead. I'm available. Consulting can be harder because I have a full-time job, and that was one of those things I said I'll step away, but at the same time, I can provide advice and presentations. Bring me in at any point. Great.
Well, we sure appreciate your time, Jordan. It's been wonderful. Like I said, we live here close together, and I wasn't aware of you, and you were doing all this stuff, but it's been a real boon to find you and to get your book. And I'm going to try to encourage my clients to get copies of this book as well as your new book. And it's just been a great time and a great experience to hear from you today.